A couple of weeks ago, I had the fortune of having a Skype conversation with one of my friends from Livermore, the town that I was living in for the last 8 years. And it was a perfect setup as snow fell outside in Highwood and the rain fell outside in Livermore. We both sat in our living rooms in sweatshirts with tea. Unlike the glorious weather that we've experienced here this weekend, I was grateful to be indoors a couple of weeks ago. And during this conversation that I had with my friend, she told me that she had been thinking recently about an incident from her childhood. She grew up on a farm, and she misses it a lot. She thinks about it often. For her, there is a feeling of freedom and aliveness that she associates with farm life. I asked her to tell me more about what she loves about it and what she misses. And one of the things that she mentioned was riding horses. Riding horses. It is, she said, simply incomparable to any other thing that she has ever done. Back when she was a child, she would ride and ride for hours. She remembers having this younger horse, and she would jump on its back and just go off and spend the whole afternoon with this animal. I asked her if she would ever fall. All of the time, she tells me. Even though she loved it, she never got the hang of doing it the right way. So every time this horse turned a corner, she would go flying off of it. The funny thing is that the horse got used to this. So after a while, the horse learned to just circle back to her, and then she would jump on it again. It wasn't long before she'd go flying off, and then the horse would just mosey in its circle and come back and pick her up. I have to say I was perplexed. I was left with no clear picture of what the appeal was, except maybe for this. Towards the end of our tea together, she said, "It was one of the only times in my life that I was completely unafraid. I don't think that I could fall like that again without being really afraid." I'd like to give a short biography here. I'm summing up vast swaths of this person's life in just a few lines, and it is a great American life, so I will obviously be leaving things out. But if I had to give a report on this person's memoir, which I read not too long ago, it would look a bit like this. Difficult childhood. Less than 1 year of formal schooling. Failed in business. Defeated for the legislature. Again failed in business. Elected to the legislature. Fiance died. Defeated for speaker. Defeated for elector, marries but faces ongoing struggles with his partner. Only 1 in 4 sons lives past the age of 18. Defeated for Congress, elected for Congress, and defeated for Senate, defeated for Vice President, defeated again for the Senate. Elected President of the United States in 1860, and then delivers the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the most important texts and moments in American history in 1863. This is, of course, the biography of Abraham Lincoln. In his 2015 Berry Street essay, the Reverend Sean Parker Denison asks what it would mean for Unitarian Universalists to think more seriously about failure, to develop a theology of failure. He he gave that lecture a creative title, which is also a play on words. He called it "Failure is Not an Option." This is, of course, a famous saying by which Denison means something very different from what its original intent was. He did not intend it to mean that we cannot fail, but rather that we have no option but to fail. If you are human, you are going to fail. Failure is not an option. Despite this truth, a truth that most of us are at least grudgingly willing to admit, there are not many developed theologies of failure. To have a theology of something means that you have considered its part in the human condition, how it informs one's philosophy and one's worldview. Developing a theology of something gives it legitimacy. It says this is a worthy area for us to consider and give attention to. There are developed theologies of community, of human nature, of suffering. But perhaps not surprisingly, there are few religions that have done this with failure. Instead, a lot of what religion talks about is success, especially today in the American context. There are megachurches that project an image of themselves as glossy and flashy, where every detail of their worship is scripted to the finest point. I promise you that is not the case here. Some churches tell their parishioners that if they are faithful, God will give them everything that they ask for. Cash and prizes and success for those who believe. One church became so enamored of this idea that the minister placed a moratorium on the use of the church parking lot by any car that was made before a certain year. This is what one might call a theology of success. A theology of success is something like this: you are worthy and good enough, perhaps even favored by God, if you meet X, Y, and Z as a standard. And if you don't, if you fail in some way, you are either not doing it right, or not having enough faith, or you simply don't belong here. A theology of success is pretty easy to comprehend and to imagine. In our culture, success is considered a legitimate goal that informs our philosophy of life and our worldview. And if you want to learn how to have success, there are no shortage of books that will help you do this. Just browse the self-help or the business section at Barnes & Noble. The same cannot be said about failure. There are not many books out there with an explicit intention of telling you how to fail. Maybe this is why I find memoirs so inspiring. The good ones lay bare the scrapes and the bruises that led to the flashy moments of success. This is definitely true of someone like Abraham Lincoln, who faced one setback after another. With respect to his shortened biography that I gave earlier, if I simply left off the last 2 lines of that biography, you would think that his life was just one failure after the next. Instead, we look up to him as a great inspirational figure. Despite the general lack of books on failure, a few brave souls have started to write on this topic. One such book is by Brené Brown, and it's called Rising Strong. She wrote this book to address the gap in literature about failure. My goal for this book, she writes, is to slow down the process of falling and rising, to bring into our awareness all of the choices and the moments that unfurl in front of us during those times of discomfort and hurt and failure. In other words, her intention is to uncover the decisions and intricacies that go into recovering from failure. But the research, she writes, was hard. Most people want to talk about their successes and not about their failures. And when we do talk about our failures, she says, we often skip over the hard parts. We want to rush through it. We want to get to the part where we pick ourselves back up and find success. Brown writes this, we much prefer stories about falling and rising to be inspirational and sanitized. We like recovery stories to move quickly through the dark so that we can get to the sweeping redemptive ending. I agree with Brown that we lose something big here when we skip to that ending and miss out on all of those moments that led up to it, all of the difficulties. What is it? What is it that we lose when we focus only on the success and skip over the failure? Often, our most tender and fragile parts show up when we fail. This is what Brown uncovers in her research. Failure brings up feelings of shame and inadequacy. It makes us remember our most difficult moments, perhaps from when we were scarred as children or wounded at other times as adults. Failure makes us rub up against our most vulnerable parts, our most human parts. And if there's no other reason to think that it deserves a theology, I think that that has to be one. Failure is a part of what makes us human. It exposes our most human and vulnerable selves. Someone that I once counseled, whom I will call John, was fired from his job. He gave me permission to share this small portion of his story. John wanted to talk with me because it had been 3 weeks since he had lost his job, and he had still not told his wife and kids. Instead, he had been going out all day and coming home in the evening, pretending that he was still working. He would get in his car and just drive and drive, sometimes stopping for coffee or going to the park. What is making it so hard for you to tell them? I asked. We spent some time sitting there and remembering. A lot of really hard feelings came up. He remembered how his father had been a relentless critic. John's mistakes were like prisms. Every time he failed and did something wrong, his father made him look at it from every angle, every distortion of light. Losing my job, John said, has been too big for me to even fully comprehend. I honestly drive around during the day not even thinking about it. I can't face it, least of all with my family. He paused for a long moment and then said, I am ashamed. Brene Brown describes this kind of shame as a familiar symptom of failure. She calls it the rock of shame, and it falls on us when we fail. We turn a mistake into something that is inherently flawed or wrong with us, and shame is the weight that holds that in place. What's worse is that when we do that, our past failures have an awful way of swarming around it. All of those inadequacies come together to confirm that we are, in fact, not good enough. Facing that failure and that shame that holds it in place can feel like trying to move a 1,000-pound boulder. I ultimately referred John to a therapist who I thought could help him with some of the memories that he was uncovering. My own abilities as a minister are limited. But what I was able to say to him in that moment and to hold in the context of our pastoral relationship was this: you are more than the sum of your failures. You are more than the sum of your failures. This is something that I believe to the core of my being. We are all more than the sum of our failures. We are human beings who are worthy of being loved in spite of what we have done or not done, accomplished or not accomplished. This inherent worthiness is at the heart of what I would envision for a theology of failure. If I had to take a stab, that theology would begin with our universalist heritage. Universalism contains the unwavering assertion that human beings are worthy no matter what. We come from love, universalism says, and we will return to love. And no cultural expectations, no institutions or artificial separations matter when it comes to that love. It doesn't matter how much we fail, we are still worthy no matter what. We may not come out of this celebrating failure for failure's sake, but we do become a little more comfortable wearing failure when it's our turn, I think. I think about my friend who kept getting back on that horse, even though she got thrown from it again and again. There was a certain affirmation of life that was hidden in that willingness to fall. She got thrown off, and it didn't bother her or the horse. Instead, the horse just ran ahead a little bit, created a wide circle, and then sidled up beside her. And then it would pause. It was her turn to get back on, to try to ride again. The horse is standing next to you. Reach out and touch its coarse mane, its hard bridle. Sense its nervous energy. See its flicking tail. Taking your turn again means that you will fail again at some point, probably just as the bruises from the last time are beginning to heal. It's your turn. It's your decision to get on or to stay off. You pause, you think, and then you decide. What's your move?